Hey everyone, it's Brett here with the Tuning School. Today I'm joined by our GM instructor Steve Morgan, and on this Tech Tuesday we're going to be talking about the differences between open loop tuning and speed density tuning. So a lot of people are confusing speed density tuning and open loop tuning to be the same thing. And unfortunately, it's just not. And so we're here today to talk about how they're different so you guys at home can have a better understanding of what you're actually dealing with. So the first thing we're gonna talk about is speed density tuning, and we're gonna define what it is and how it works so you have a better understanding. So Steve, what is speed density tuning exactly?
So speed density is when a vehicle's only fueling calculations comes from the VE tables.
Right, exactly. And so this is an example of what a VE table looks like. So this is an older car, it's a 2002 Camaro, and this is a stock VE table. Now, if you're using just this stock VE table in a naturally aspirated setting to do all of the fueling calculation, then that's what we call speed density, right? But a lot of people are also associating this with operating system upgrades. And we'll get into that in a second, but basically the way this table is laid out, it's based off engine speed, and it's based off of engine load, right? And so this engine load, it's actually getting from the manifold absolute pressure sensor, right? MAP. And so you'll hear people also refer to speed density tuning as MAP only tuning, because they're using that MAP sensor to do a bulk of the fueling calculations that are happening here. Now, the data inside the table itself is usually either based off of a VE percentage, like we see here. This is a percentage of how full the engine is, or the volumetric efficiency of the engine at this point. And then we also have a reading that's going to be in an airflow number. It's a much larger number. It's a 4-digit number.
Absolutely.
And it's an airflow number. Now, we talked briefly a second ago about speed density upgrade, right?
Yep.
And so when you go just back here, you'll see that we have under operating system, we have these operating system enhancements or upgrades. And what these are doing is they're saying, I'm now going to take that table that used to read to 100 kPa, and I'm going to change it to read to 200 kPa. This is where we get the most common definition of what speed density is, because these are physically labeled speed density. When people say speed density, they most commonly refer to an operating system upgrade.
More of in a race application is when you would upgrade.
Exactly, because this is specifically for boost, right? Because a naturally aspirated engine's only going to read to 100 kPa. So the only reason you need to read to 2 or 3 bar, which would be 200 or 300 kPa, is when you have boost, right? And so an example of what one of these 2-bar OS upgrades looks like is this. So we have the same table, but now it goes all the way up to 210 kPa. And as you can see, when you do this upgrade, it's pretty difficult when you first start out, because the table's all 519 across the board. So it's a pretty difficult starting point, right? The last example we have is of a Gen 4. This is a virtual VE, right? Still a VE table, still based off of manifold absolute pressure, still based off engine speed, but now we've got that airflow reading on the inside, and you notice the table's a lot larger. And the reason we had the advent of these virtual VE tables is because with the advent of variable camshafts, the VE is now variable, because they could bleed off cylinder pressures or things like that, depending on where that camshaft is at.
Makes it twice as hard.
Exactly, and so it makes it a lot more difficult, and you get this virtual system that comes into play. But if any of these 3 examples, if you're using just one of these 3 tables to do all of your fueling calculations, then you're dealing with a speed density setup. So, Steve, what are some applications where you should run a speed density setup? What are some reasons you need to? So
if you have an early Gen 3 setup, you know, you have an F-body car or an early Gen 3 truck or SUV, you're going to have MAF limitations very quickly. So you're going to run into where your your cold air intake is too small, and that mass airflow sensor reads in a very low hertz, and you're going to max that out very fast. So that's one. You know, of course, boost. Boosted applications. Boost is just going to complicate that whole system and make it even worse.
It just maxes out what that sensor can read even more quickly, right? And then sometimes you have setup issues, right? So you've got guys that are building these swaps, or even these really fast race cars, and when they build them, they're either not putting provision in the charge tube for a mass airflow sensor, or when you build a harness for your swap, you're not even putting a mass airflow, or O2s and all that kind of stuff.
And that makes it hard for the guys that are doing swaps that are wanting to drive their vehicles on the street if they don't have O2 provisions or they don't have mass airflow provisions.
Makes it more difficult.
It makes it more difficult. The car doesn't drive as good.
But this is what a lot of people at home refer to as a standalone harness.
Sure.
Standalone is fancy speak for delete half the things that were there before.
Right.
And usually the mass airflow sensor is one of those things that ends up on the chopping block.
That and the O2s are one of the first things.
One of the first things to go, exactly. Now it's standalone, right?
Yep,
and so when you're doing that stuff, it's difficult. But what we're finding is that's not necessary. Most of these applications don't require you to do that. If you've got a swap, there's no reason you can't run a mass airflow sensor. And like you said, in fact, the vehicle's gonna drive better.
Yep.
And a lot of times in forced induction applications, you can still run forced induction with a mass airflow sensor, especially on Gen 4s because those mass airflow sensors read better. Right. But what's some solutions for the Gen 3 guys that are running forced induction?
So for some of you Gen 3 guys out there that are forced inducted or have big cubic inch engines, you can always look into changing your air intake to a 4-inch diameter tube. So they can put the 4-inch diameter tube in with a LS7 MAF card, and that LS7 MAF card has a lower sampling rate, so you can read the MAF with boost, bigger cubic inch, more airflow coming through to make it work. And not only that is your mass airflow sensor is your first set of eyes of the system.
Absolutely.
This is your secondary is your VE tables.
Yeah,
so
it's your backup. GM literally defined this as the backup fueling calculations.
Absolutely.
And most people instantly go, well, I'll just run my car in the backup all the time, right?
Yeah.
And from our experiences, we've seen that cars drive much better on mass airflow only. And these guys are jumping ship from that mass airflow way too quick.
Absolutely.
Now, when you do what you said and you run that 4-inch tube with that LS7 MAF, it's still a hard car to tune. That mass airflow curve still needs a lot of recalibration work.
Calibration, it does.
Exactly, but these speed density tunes can be fairly difficult to do as well. In fact, in my opinion, they can be more difficult.
Yes.
So if you're a novice starting out, mass airflow tunes are the way to go because it's a lot more easy to accomplish.
A lot easier. You or the customer are going to be much happier with the way the car drives and the operation of everything.
Exactly. And so that's not to say that speed density tunes aren't valid and you can't do them. You can. They're absolutely valid. They're a valid way to tune. You can tune cars well on them, but we think they run better on mass airflow sensor.
Yep, especially for a street car.
Especially for a street car. And honestly, this can be pretty difficult still. And so it's viable, but it can be difficult. But that's what speed density is, right? So speed density is using only this VE table and deleting your mass airflow sensor from the calculation.
So now we're going to talk about the definition of open loop. Brett, can you tell us exactly what open loop is?
So the way we define open loop is you've turned off or removed your factory O2 sensors, okay? Now, specifically, that's gonna be your primary O2 sensors, right? The ones that come before the catalytic converters, those are the ones that are controlling the fueling, right?
Right.
And so you've turned them off, which means the computer can no longer make any fueling corrections. It doesn't see the exhaust that's coming out of the cylinders, it doesn't know if it's rich or lean, and it doesn't make any corrections.
You've blindfolded the system.
You've blindfolded it, right? I joke around and I say, you've basically turned it into a carburetor, right? But it's still really common that guys are doing this. And to give you guys a little bit of background, we'll look at a stock scan file. And so what you have here in these purple and blue numbers, you have your O2 millivolts. And they're telling the computer if the fueling is rich or lean after each combustion. And then with that information, the computer then decides, okay, I need to add or take away fueling in a percentage-based format with its fuel trims, right? So this is what the factory vehicle is doing. And if you guys want more information on this, we have a video on how to understand your O2 sensors and a video on how to use your long-term fuel trims for tuning. Those are linked in the description. I definitely recommend checking these out so you can get a little bit more information on how they work. But when you remove your O2 sensors or you've turned them off, these are doing nothing.
Nothing at all.
No O2s are reporting, no fuel trims are changing anything, right?
Exactly.
And so when you get to this point, what that means is you have to actually tune with a wideband the whole time. If you have a race car, and you're gonna run it down the track, and let's say when you go to the track, every time you run it, you're checking the fueling.
Yes,
and you're gonna do a tune every time at the track. That's okay. But I don't know too many guys that are tuning their car every day when they drive it to work.
Right.
And so unless you wanna do that and have your fueling be that right on every time, you have to have those O2 sensors,
Don't run C16 in your street cars.
And that's another great point, right? So that's another thing. Leaded fuels are gonna ruin those O2 sensors. So unless you're running leaded fuels, or unless you have basically open headers or a fender exit, use your O2 sensors, install them, have your guy remake your harness, right? Weld bungs in, do whatever it takes to get those sensors back.
Unless you're trailering your vehicle to the racetrack, we suggest you use this system. It will be a lot easier on you and your customer.
Absolutely. So that is how we define open loop. So now to tie it all together for you guys, as you can see, neither of these applications have to be associated. But what we're seeing from guys at home is they're saying, I'm running a speed density setup. And when they say that, they mean no mass airflow sensor and no O2s.
Right.
But as you guys can see from this definition, they're not the same. It's not the same setup. And actually you can run speed density and still retain those O2 sensors.
Yes, as long as your vehicle is using the VE table only, it's speed density. It doesn't matter if it's open loop, closed loop, if it is only getting its fueling calculations from the VE tables like we said earlier.
Yep, then you're good, you're in speed density. And so really the public service announcement that we have here is retain those O2 sensors.
Yes.
Speed density doesn't mean you have to delete them. And so that's what you're looking at with the differences between the two systems.
So thanks everybody for watching. We hope you learned today a little bit more about speed density versus open loop tuning.
Absolutely, and for more high performance tuning knowledge, make sure you check out thetuningschool.com, subscribe to our social media, and as always, stay tuned. Well, this is stop. This is no. Stop doing it.
In the shoe shelves. I'm still better looking than Brett.
And we'll get into that in a second, but if you look at our scan file, if we look at a stock vehicle, if you look at our scan file, let's start over.